All right, here it is. Your NFL strategy show, Thursday, November 21st, week 12 already, man. Game by game breakdown. Dave Lochran with me, as always, Sal Vetri, and as always, sponsoring the show, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, home of that $200,000 NFL baller. But if you're not wanting to wait, you want to just get into something today, we got the 25K NBA baller, 5K to first, 2-game slate, but certainly an interesting one with Portland going into battle once again without Damian Lillard. And now they have the new addition, Carmelo Anthony. Of course, you can check out all of our NBA content throughout the day. Strategy show just concluded. Deeper dive live before lock coming up later, of course. But Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports will give you $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. All you got to do is sign up through us at awesemo.com. Very simple. Go to the NFL tab on awesemo.com, click articles, and you'll see any of these free articles like the Yahoo one. The Showdown one specifically for tonight should be right there on the landing page. Click that. It's free. Read it. Enjoy it. EMAC does a good job. And click the Yahoo link. Sign up. Use the code AWESEMO, AWESEMO. Get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points. Them YSRPs, they're as good as cash to be used on the site to play and win real money. And once you play through that, of course, withdraw that money. So get those YSRPs. Head over to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Sal, where only you can become a baller. What do you think?
I like that a lot. I like that. That's going to get that entices me to want to go up right now and get there. And I already have an account, so you're going to get a lot of transfers with that. That's good. That's good.
Dude, they told me, they said, start telling everyone they can become a baller. And I said, I'll do it. For you guys, I will do that. That didn't happen. I don't want to lie on Yahoo's name. I just thought it would sound cool. And now we're sticking with it. Anyway, man.
You're about to take your slogan.
That's right. Of course, welcome to everyone. Glad to have you guys with us. Sal Vetri, how you doing, bro?
Yeah, man, I'm doing good. The final week of season's going along, final week of buys. We get the short week because of Thanksgiving next week. But, yeah, I'm excited about this. We're going to have some really big slates coming forward in the next couple of weeks, but looking forward to breaking this one down.
You know, last night was a historic day in the United States. I'm not talking about these impeachment inquiries. No, that's not what I'm talking about. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I'm not. I don't know if it has anything to do with Luka, but I'm assuming NFL.
No. It's basketball, and it's not Luka.
Okay.
I'm going to give you one shot. What historic moment happened yesterday? I know chat's going to light up in a second. They're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Don't blow this, Sal.
Don't blow this?
Don't blow this. What happened yesterday that was historic in the NBA? Come on, chat. Help him out.
Hey, well, it didn't have to do with Luka? Yeah, I don't know if it's not hitting my head right now. I was going to say Luka just outscoring assists, steal, or assist points and rebounds than the whole entire Golden State team. But I actually just peeked at chat, but I have a funny story for what this was.
So now you know.
I know. So I don't want to make it sound like I just suddenly found out, but so I knew it happened in my head. So the slate starts yesterday in NBA. I got a Whole Foods around the corner. Never really went to Whole Foods much. Now they're stealing all my money because I'm just addicted to their buffet. But I go to their Whole Foods buffet yesterday, and there's a worker who's on his phone, and he goes up to the pastry counter, and he just starts like getting crazy. And he's obviously watching basketball. I can see it. And they're talking about a guy who's done something for the first time since the preseason. I'm like, who can they be talking about? And I'm in the Raleigh area, so I thought they were talking about Devontae Graham having like another good first quarter. And then I heard them say Ben Simmons hit a three, and I was like, okay. And you're one of the first people I thought of because I don't have many Sixers fans that I know.
Yeah, man. By the way, that was a smooth stroke. Like, did you see the shot?
Yeah, I ended up seeing it afterwards.
It was nice. And Stod, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but we don't talk politics in here, bro. Come on. We do daily fantasy sports so we can escape our everyday lives, right? So we can escape that stuff. No, come on. We don't talk that in here. We talk Ben Simmons knocking down corner baseline threes. That's what we talk about. And we get into some NFL as well. You ready to start breaking down this 11-gamer?
Yeah, I'm excited. I thought something crazy happened that I just missed the news on, but
no,
I guess that was very crazy.
Please don't downplay this, friend. Something historic and something crazy did happen.
Bookmark it.
He's shooting 100% from three. Give the man some credit. Do you realize, though, if he's actually started shooting threes, even a few of them per game, like I forget who was defending him, but he was so far off. And when you saw Ben Simmons actually get ready to shoot that, dude was like flabbergasted. He tried to take a stride and close out, and he's like, wait, what just happened to me? It'll be interesting to see what happens in the event that they do start to get him more involved as a three-point shooter, but it all comes down to him. Anyway, Buffalo and Denver. I went over like our ownership first look and talking pivots and low-owned guys, low-owned upside plays with Chris Baggs yesterday. And we took a game-by-game approach, but it was more so just looking at some guys from each game that could be pivots at low ownership that could go completely overlooked. Today, we're really just going to break them all down one by one and really get into it, starting with Buffalo and Denver. But as you know, when we go game by game, these first 4 games on the slate that we get to are pretty ugly from a DFS standpoint, but we'll do our best to hit on everything because sometimes you can find some decent stuff in there. So let's go ahead and jump into it. One of the lowest total, no, I'm sorry. Matter of fact, the lowest total on the slate, 38.5, Buffalo and Denver. Bills are 4-point favorites. Denver, top 5 defensive team in the run game and in the pass. For me, the one thing that stands out here would be Phillip Lindsay. I think we saw that Vic Fangio and company actually want to get him more involved, to be that lead guy. And we finally saw him play more snaps than Royce Freeman for the first time in like 7 weeks. So that is okay to me. Buffalo's run defense has been, I'd say, one aspect of the game where they've struggled, unless of course they're facing Miami, and nobody struggles against Kalen Ballage. But all in all, it is a tough spot. Cortland Sutton's going to get the Tre'Davious White treatment. Tim Patrick is Tim Patrick. John Brown's going to see Chris Harris Jr., but maybe you think it's worth it. Go ahead and break this one down for me.
Yeah, so starting on the Denver side of the ball, I think that starting with Phillip Lindsay makes sense. And yeah, right now he's one of the lower owned guys who I think he actually provides some much needed running back value on this slate, just in the 5K or below range. He's the one who stands out to me as a guy that I'd actually not mind going out of my way to get to. We saw last week, he saw 60+% of the snaps after an active effort, and they were saying they wanted to get him the ball more. They did. But even if he's still in this 50-50 timeshare with Freeman, I think it's at least argumental, and I would say that he is the higher upside back. So he's priced at a 6-week low. So even if you get the worst possible scenario and he's splitting 50-50 again, getting 12 to 15 touches in this game, it's a good matchup for him, and he's at a cheap price point on a slate that lacks value. So I think you only have upside in this price tag in Lindsay. He's going to be one of the, I don't want to say top tier priorities for me, but he's right around like a top 5 or 6 running back guy that I have interest in this week, just due to the lack of value. Going to Noah Fant, the tight ends just signed a guy, or the tight ends, the Broncos just signed a guy, Orson Charles, a tight end, who is pretty much now going to be the backup because Jeff Heuerman continues to deal with a knee injury. And that's very good news for Noah Fant. Since Heuerman's gone out and Sanders has left, he's seen 86% of the snaps and a 25% target share. So Fant is a guy that he kind of just rounds out the rest of the 3 and 4K tight ends of, if you can punt them, you're probably going to punt this week if you're not paying up. And the ones that are at lower ownership make a lot more sense to go to. He's one of them. So I think Lindsay stands out here. I think Fant. Tim Patrick's in a pool of what seems like the best week for just 3K punt wide receivers. Seems like there's a bunch of wide receiver 2s that have upside down there. He's one of the guys that I think he can get you 12 or 15 out of like a sea of 6 or 7 of them.
For sure. Timothy says he moved his touch count up the last 2 weeks, but who's to say it doesn't go back to closer to 50-50? Well, to me, it does actually say something when your head coach says Lindsay is going to be the leading rusher going forward.
Yeah, and the touch count is big because not only is his moving up, it's not like Freeman's was as well in those games that they went run heavy. You had last week Phillip Lindsay out-touched Freeman 18-9, twice as many touches on twice as many snaps. So it was good to see that. And that's the most extreme we've seen this year between them, not only in touches, but also snaps. Freeman only saw 30%. At worst, he's been in like the mid-40s so far this season.
Does anything else from either side, though, stand out to you here? I don't want to spend too much time on bad games, but I guess we still want to touch on everything.
Yeah, no, just Sutton doesn't really stand out because of this matchup all that much. It doesn't make me interested at all. Like the best spot last week was against you had against Tre'Davious White was Devontae Parker, and he picked up, we talked about, half of his yards on a fall down by Tre'Davious White. So besides that, he's been very good in shadows. On the Buffalo side, you get probably 2 of the better cornerbacks in this game. So you get Chris Harris Jr. on John Brown, who last week John Brown actually, or last week you saw Stephon Diggs actually have some success against Chris Harris Jr., but not all of it was on Harris Jr. He's been very solid this year. So John Brown now at the highest price point that he's been out all season, it continues to come up. It's not a spot that I want to get to him. Singletary at low ownership and a price coming down makes some sense, but I believe in this number 1 rated Denver Broncos, or number 2 now, run defense. a lot, and it's not a spot where I want to get the Singletary, who you still might have Frank Gore getting 10 touches. So it's really just Philip Lindsay somewhat of a priority from this game, and then Noah Fant is a punt tight end.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think I can get to anybody from this side, and John Brown's price is a little bit. It's up there. He's coming off a great game. Don't get me wrong. And yes, of course, that was a difficult. It was an easy matchup against Miami. Granted, who's the guy that came in and replaced Xavier Howard, who's actually looked decent.
Yeah, Nick Needham.
Yes, thank you. He has not been that bad, but I mean, at the same time, this is a much more difficult matchup, and that price tag is up there. I don't see a repeat performance coming here. Let's talk about Chicago and the New York Giants. Another game. I don't know how long we're going to spend on it, but we'll do our best. You've got the total at 40.5, third lowest. The Bears are 6-point favorites here. They have a 23.3 implied total. Look, I mean, I don't really think the Bears are in any position to run away with this game. It's possible that they win like 20-0, but it just doesn't feel like a spot where they're going to put up huge numbers, because it doesn't matter who they face. They haven't been able to do that this season outside of a matchup with the Redskins. Their point total 7, 20, 14, 16. They did have 25 against the Saints, but if you watch that, 2 of those touchdowns came with like less than 5 minutes left in the fourth. They were getting smoked. 16-31, 16-3. It's been a bad offense, and Mitch Trubisky did practice fully yesterday. He should be good to go, but I mean, all in all, I guess something has to give here. Is the Giants defense going to allow a big game to Trubisky and this Chicago offense? Or is Trubisky once again going to struggle, as he's done in tough matchups and as he's done in easy matchups this season?
Yeah, exactly. He struggles everywhere. And this is as good of a matchup as he'll get. 28th ranked pass rush, second worst only to the Cardinals in coverage is this Giants team. And it continues to go down even with a guy like Janoris Jenkins playing really great the last month of the season. They've done a little bit more zone, but every other cornerback and their safeties have just been abysmal during that time, as they have been all year. So 31st ranked in coverage. It's a nice spot for Trubisky, who was ruled in as a starter after some issues with his hip pointers, but seems to be good to go. Yeah, it's a spot that I like. Allen Robinson's price point. Again, not the highest of upside with Trubisky throwing him the ball, but continues to excel some weeks, even though he has Trubisky throwing him the ball. So Robinson stands out as a guy who will move into the slot about a third of his snaps. He'll get to avoid Janoris Jenkins, who, I mean, the first part of the season, Jenkins was terrible, but he's done really well over the last month.
Yeah.
Won a couple of Player of the Week awards. He is given up only 5 receptions for 34 yards and a pick over the last 4 games. So, I mean, that's really good production. So he'll get some of him for probably 50% of this game, nowhere near a shadow. He'll get DeAndre Baker for the other part of it, who has been really bad all season long. So it's interesting because you get Robinson in a pretty decent matchup, especially for his skill set. And then the secondary receivers like Taylor Gabriel, Anthony Miller, I imagine you get more Taylor Gabriel on the field, especially if they lead in this one. Miller will come out and not be on the field when they don't run more 3 wide receiver sets. But Gabriel at his price point seems attractive against a guy like DeAndre Baker. Miller at his price point in the slot against Grant Haley. So these are guys I don't want to prioritize, but there is some interest for me in the secondary options here.
Yeah, when you look at anyone with at least 100 coverage snaps since week 8, Janoris Jenkins yards per snap allowed is at 0.27. DeMonte Casey and Casey Hayward Jr. are the only 2 that have been better than Janoris Jenkins in that respect. So you're right. He's been way, way better here. 0.27 yards per snap, Sal.
Yeah, and there's been some good wide receivers in there that I was looking at. I think he played Amari one week when Amari was banged up. It still played Amari. Does it say the passer rating there?
Yeah, passer rating is, let's see here, 7.
7?
7. It's the low. Casey Hayward's is 0, which is, my God. Janoris Jenkins is allowing a passer rating of 7. Granted, he's been targeted only 11 times over those 3 games, but you know what? When you're playing well, when your coverage is good, you're not going to get targeted as much. So yeah. 7 targets or 11 targets, 4 receptions, 28 yards, and only 5 yards after the catch with a passer rating of 7.
Yeah, so like he's been great, and that's something to watch moving forward. I'm not sure how much it affects Robinson this week, just because a third of his snaps will move into the slot. He'll probably move to other sides of the field for parts of them. So it'll be a tough matchup for like a third to maybe half of the game against Jenkins. But I think he's probably one of the more talented receivers Jenkins has faced, but it's definitely nothing to ignore. The other side of it has just still been bad in terms of Baker, Grant Haley in the slot, really getting played out of a job right now. So I do think that you can get to a lot of pieces of this Chicago team, and it seems scary with Trubisky still there, but the matchup is great against the Giants, and I do think in terms of like millie maker stacks, it's at least viable.
How is it that Demonte Casey for Atlanta has 122 coverage snaps over his last 3 games and only 2 targets?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's actually weird because I was going to say like the last 2 weeks they've been rotating other guys into the slot, but if it says he's playing the coverage snaps, then yeah, that's odd.
Right. Yeah, 122. I don't know. That's well, it can't be that good. But let's look at the rest of this game with Chicago. You mentioned Allen Robinson. Just quickly, your quick take on the backfield with Tariq Cohen and David Montgomery. Like, are you willing to revisit this dreadful experience?
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to revisit David Montgomery. I think that, and I want to pull up his ownership right now. It's coming in, yeah, it's coming in low around 10% as it probably should, but he's just a guy who's going to rely on touchdowns. You might get a catch or two out of him, and his snap count is all over the place if they want to give Tariq Cohen receptions that game. But as a 6.5 point favorite, it at least sets up to be nice for Montgomery. The price point is probably appropriate for what his role is going to be. He's a guy who 15.3 rush attempts per game. It's not great. But it's skewed by 2 games where week 1 he saw 3 carries, and then I believe it was week 7 he only saw 2 carries. So it's going to skew that a ton. Usually when he gets the ball in the 70% of the snaps when they're leading, that's happened 2 out of the last 3 games. He'll probably get somewhere around 16 to 18 carries. So for the price point, low ownership, burned people last time. I'm willing to go back to it. It's not great, but again, there's really not that much running back value on the slate, and I think he at least suits up to be in a nice situation.
Okay. New York. A tough matchup here, of course. Daniel Jones, by the way, let's stop calling him Danny Dimes, please. He has not earned that nickname. But here he is in a very difficult spot. I think I mentioned to you and to Sal yesterday as well that Chicago's done a very good job of limiting the big plays. And to me, that makes a big difference when you're talking about someone like Barkley, who will lose yards on 5 consecutive runs and then break off 50. They've allowed 2 runs of 20 plus yards this season. That is a really low number. That's the lowest in the league, as a matter of fact. 0 runs of 40 plus yards. But when you're looking at the passing game as well, so we can tie this into the entire offense, and I'll turn it over to you. The Chicago Bears have not allowed big passing plays either, right? You look at the 20 plus yard plays they've allowed. For reference, the Cardinals have allowed 50, the Raiders have allowed 48, and the Bears have allowed 26. They've just done a very good job of stifling the big chunk plays on the ground and through the air. And I think it takes some upside away from much of these guys, which is why, though, I wouldn't be opposed to looking at someone like Golden Tate. But that's about it for me.
Yeah, I was going to say Golden Tate's one that stands out for me. He'll have what on paper looks like a more difficult matchup in the slot, but the best matchup on the team here. But his matchup in the slot against screen, it's not going to be all that bad. You see some of the opponents that the slot has faced against the Bears, and it's like Geronimo Allison, Deshaun Hamilton, Hunter Renfrow before he started coming on, Trey Quinn, Austin Carr. Like it's a bunch of no names. Now you have Golden Tate, who's by far the best of them. So it's really easy to kind of neutralize what you've seen so far here. So I think just the overall volume going to the slot for the Giants and Daniel Jones is a spot that I will take a chance on Golden Tate. Yeah, my interest in Saquon earlier in the week, it was somewhat there just because I thought there would be low ownership, which is following. But there's just so many other running backs priced around him that are either priced down and are barely more expensive or just $1,000 cheaper, $1,500 cheaper that I think have similar upside. The Bears did go through a stretch of 2 games against the Eagles and against the Saints and Latavius Murray where they were just getting gashed on the ground. And in those games, there was 30 plus touches to the running backs, and they were injured. They still don't have Akeem Hicks, who's going to be a big piece for their run stop, but they got back Goldman and a couple of other guys in the defensive line got healthier. So it's a spot where the Bears still rank top 10 in rush defense. They still rank top 10 in pressure. I'm not really in that or feeling that confident about going to Saquon or any of these other guys. Darius Slayton on the outside should see a volume hit with Sterling Shepard coming back. Shepard, if he does come back, he's going to have a more difficult matchup on the outside. So it's not a spot that I love. Track Evan Ingram's status. He could be a play, of course, if he's going to suit up at a weak tight end position. But it's really just Golden Tate for me. The rest of this defense, honestly, the Bears defense is probably in play. Daniel Jones has a problem fumbling, and it's a weaker offensive line against a good pass rush.
So that's pretty much sums it up for the Giants, yeah?
Yeah, I think so. It's just an ugly game.
Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. This is the one I'll get into trouble with, Sal.
Yeah.
Johnny Holton, baby. By the way, I am 100% aware that Johnny Holton is a huge risk. Like, this guy could finish with 0 receptions. Totally get it. But right now, Juju Smith-Schuster isn't expected to play on Sunday with a concussion. Deontay Johnson did practice, so that definitely takes some shine away. And that's why Johnny Holton, to me, would have been a whole lot more appealing in the event that Johnson played. So yesterday, I would have liked him a whole lot more. It's just crazy. He had 195, air yards, which was second most on the week behind only DJ Shark, who had more than double the amount of targets of Holton. So assuming Johnson plays, I'll back off of that. But if for some reason he doesn't play, I will look towards Johnny Holton and hope that, maybe he hauls in a deep pass or two, despite Mason Rudolph being a terrible passer. But yeah, I think Johnson plays, which once again relegates this game into the dumpster for me outside of let's start with the run game here. Okay. James Conner, is not expected to play, or at least I don't think he's going to. Let's assume for a moment that he won't. Benny Snell is practicing, and then Jalen Samuels. The backfield here, you don't have a clear-cut guy. We don't even know who's going to be active, and some of these guys are not really cheap. So what are your thoughts here? It's a good matchup, but of course gets a little bit muddied here with the amount of bodies that might be returning.
Yeah, it's not somewhere that I'm really targeting. Even if Benny Snell does come back, I think it's very questionable at this point. It just makes it a total wash. I think Trey Edmonds is the best 3K running back on the board, but that's not saying much. Like, if there's no Benny Snell, you might get 10 touches out of Trey Edmonds, and more times than not, you're probably in like the 40 rushing yards range, and he's not going to have any passing game upside because Jalen Samuels is on this team and will be on the field for any time they need a pass catching back. So with Samuels priced all the way up to the 7K range, he's now $3,200 more than he was 3 weeks ago when he was running when he had 13 receptions on 13 targets. In the 2 games without Connor this season, he ran 47 total, or when he started, 47 total routes. But the far majority of those came in the week where he caught 13 balls, and that was before kind of Trey Edmonds became a thing. So last week, Edmonds actually outsnapped Jalen Samuels. In any event that the Steelers aren't playing from behind big, you're going to have probably a clear split, if not Edmonds getting more work. And that's not a great spot to be in because he doesn't have much pass catching upside. So the Steelers backfield is pretty much a wash for me. And it gets even worse if Snell comes back.
Are you interested in any pass catchers here?
I actually like Vance McDonald. He's
going to be popular too.
Yeah, that's what I was seeing. Like, if Juju's going to be out and there's no Connor, you obviously have Jalen Samuels being more of a priority in the short passing game like we saw a couple weeks back. But I think Vance McDonald will also step in. The issue with that is, and Luffy just hit on it, is anytime that a tight end starts to become popular, right now I think it's still at a point where I'm okay with it. But if it gets to like 15+% ownership, you're really just banking on touchdowns at that point. The only upside with Vance McDonald this week is you should see an increase in volume because there is no Connor and there is no Juju in the short to intermediate range in a very beneficial matchup. So McDonald's probably the guy that I would get the most here. And then I just really never break down defenses, but this is as good of a spot as it gets for a number 1 overall ranked defense against a 31st ranked offense and a guy who's last week averaged 3.8 yards per attempt, which is like, even if you had double that, it would start to get good.
Exactly. Yeah, but you make a good point on Vance McDonald, though. When you're talking ownership, with tight ends like this, where with Vance you're hoping for, 5 for 50 and a touchdown, these guys are the ones that, say his ownership comes up throughout the week, these are the fadeable guys, or at least coming in very underweight in tournaments. Darren Waller being a good example of that. Everyone loading up on him, despite, a couple really good games. He's a good player, but his involvement, his production has expectedly declined recently. And it's unlikely that, a $5,700 Darren Waller last week is going to kill you if you don't play him. I feel similarly with Vance McDonald. And there are other tight ends, despite it being a bad position, that can give you that 5 for 50 and a touchdown. So I like him, but I think if his price comes up, I'd be more reluctant to play him in tournaments. On the Cincinnati side, I think you probably see Joe Mixon get a lot of work again, but this is a tough matchup. Finley's been terrible. I don't know what there is here, and whether like I don't even care who's active at wide receiver. Does it really matter at this point?
Yeah, I don't think it matters at this point. It's just like I can say that the price tag on Tyler Boyd looks nice, but the upside there is like maybe he sees 5 or 6 targets.
Well, and his floor is literally 0 points.
Yeah, his floor is 0 points. And aside from touchdowns, which is, we should probably filter that out for everybody, his upside there, which is low based on this offense getting down the field, is probably like 5 catches for 40 or 50 yards. Auden Tate got injured. He's been practicing or at least was limited, which was surprising. He got carted off, I think, with like a neck injury. But either way, I don't think you see AJ Green again this season. It's just gross. Like I have no interest in rostering anybody attached to Ryan Finley. In the backfield, Joe Mixon, if it was a better matchup, I'd get there. Steelers ranked 4th in rush defense, number 1 overall defense. It's just a scary spot for a team that can get behind big early. There's no upside here. Tyler Eifert just becomes another punt tight end that'll have no ownership if you want to just get to a guy who might have 3 catches, 30 yards, and a touchdown.
Cleveland and Miami. Cleveland Browns are big favorites here. Pretty low total in this game, 44.5. So not crazy low, but that most of that's going to Cleveland. 27.8 total. They're 11-point favorites. You and I think, did a pretty good job of breaking down Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt in this backfield on Tuesday. Check that show out, the NFL Strategy Show. If you haven't seen it yet, you can find it right here, youtube.com/Awesemo. And we agreed that, first of all, the price tag is getting up there. Like, Chubb is not cheap. There's no question. He is expensive. But even though he's not a third down guy and isn't going to be involved in third downs, in a game where you're almost a 2-touchdown favorite, you would have to assume that Kareem Hunt that Nick Chubb still gets a lot of opportunities on first and second down, and could see upwards of, 25 touches again.
Yeah, definitely. I right now I have him in for 22 carries and 1.5 targets. So it's a spot that I like him at this point. If his ownership right now, I think is fair. It's coming in right around average 14.5%. So there's nothing wrong with that ownership on it for the matchup. It's just a matter of prioritizing him around, well, one, if you're paying all the way up for McCaffrey, and if you're not prioritizing him around the Alvin Kamaras, the Zekes, Leonard Fournette's. But the ownership where it is right now, I think I feel fair on that. I don't really want to take a massive stance on Chubb this week. I think that the matchup's surely good. He has all the red zone and touchdown upside in the world. I think you brought up 11-1 red zone touches since Kareem Hunt has returned for Chubb. So it's still a good spot. It's just that I'll probably prioritize a couple of other guys a little bit ahead of him who have that passing game role. There's nothing I worry about. I wish that Kareem Hunt was more popular just based on what he's doing, but it seems like as of right now, the field's not on him, as they probably shouldn't be. But if he's going to stay that low owned, I think he's at least worth a look. I don't have much interest in his role as like sort of a James White type of a guy. But if he's going to be like 1% owned by Sunday, it's at least something to look at, where we've seen backups against Miami have gotten an extra 5 or 6 carries in a game alone.
Right. Any interest in Hunt?
Yeah, no. So it's very middling. It'll be like, right now there's none, but I saw the ownership was below 5%. So a little bit more interest there, only because he can see probably 5 more touches in this game, but probably won't have much, if any, of him. It's really just Chubb and the ownership where he's at. I think I agree with it.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, Kareem Hunt is pretty much a wide receiver at this point. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? This isn't to say that, it's not to say that he's not going to get some opportunities on the ground, but like if you're playing Kareem Hunt, you're playing him for his pass catching ability. That's pretty fair comment, right?
Yeah, pretty fair comment. And it's just like you still have Odell, you still have Landry. So even though he's like James White, James White is not dealing with anywhere near as many guys who can potentially catch the ball and have as much skill in the receiving core as the Browns have.
Right. And keep this in mind. Like, Kareem Hunt ran 22 routes in week 11, which was 13th among running backs, tied with James White and Devin Singletary. Miles Sanders ran 37. So, like, he's also basically a wide receiver.
Yeah.
And I only bring that up because when you're looking at price tags, Miles Sanders in this spot, I can't pretend that I like him. But what I'm saying is there are also running backs that are a lot cheaper than Kareem Hunt that pretty much have the same role as him. So don't get enamored with a guy just because he's, now involved in an offense after being out the first half of the season. Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry, thoughts on them and David Njoku if he returns?
Yeah, I really like Njoku. If he returns, I think you'll probably just see the ownership be nothing because he won't be ruled in probably till an hour and a half before the game. So I do like Njoku as a guy who we know has a ton of skill, is having a very good year in this offense. And there's a lot of pieces that can go along with this. So I think he's fine if he's active and you want to play him as long as we have something around his status and that he's not going to be limited. Njoku seems okay. But for Jarvis Landry's at 10% owned right now. I'll probably have none. Well, the price point comes up. He's moved out of the slot a ton since Kareem Hunt has come there. Kareem Hunt has run 24% of his routes out of the slot. You've seen a 2-week low out of Jarvis Landry's slot routes. He's usually running 60 to 7%. He only ran 42%, 41.9 over the last 2 weeks. So with Landry moving to the outside now, it obviously reduces his catch percentage and his overall upside as a guy who he still runs decent depth of routes, but just a higher PPR upside for a guy like Landry. And then also you throw in if Njoku returns, it just crushes Landry's overall value. So I think if that ownership, I hope it comes up on Landry just to have more leverage against it. But I think he's just in a much worse spot with Kareem Hunt there. I actually think Kareem Hunt impacts Landry more than it'll impact Nick Chubb, what we've seen the last 2 weeks. I like Odell this week. Just seeing the ownerships around average. It's nothing really to worry about taking a stance on. I have a lot of interest in him. We saw Nick Needham, who has been good, have trouble last week, although on a lot of volume, 11 targets. He gave up 5 catches, 84 yards to John Brown. Odell's just a guy at that price point that I'm willing to take a chance on as long as the ownership stays where it is.
I'm willing to as well. And we've seen that Baker Mayfield is clearly emphasizing getting him the ball. So
Yeah.
if that's going to be the case, there aren't many guys that can come up with bad passes than Odell Beckham. Granted, Baker Mayfield's thrown him some passes that literally nobody, like Larry Fitzgerald in his prime, couldn't come down with those. So, it is what it is, but I still think there's a lot of opportunity for volume there and it's a solid performance. The only concern is that they just run the hell out of the ball and they don't go pass heavy, which they probably won't need to, which is why I do like Chubb. But Odell Beckham and Chubb will be the 2 guys I like most in this spot. On the Miami side, there isn't a thing that I'm really finding appealing, especially now that Devontae Parker's price tag is coming up to a point where you're not exactly getting massive value or a big discount on him.
Yeah, exactly. Parker's price tag's up. Just no interest in Kalen Ballage, and it finally seems like the field doesn't have interest either, which makes sense. And then Gesicki played, so we continue to see this expansive role for Mike Gesicki, even if he's not producing some weeks. But he played a career high in snaps last week, which was pretty interesting at 86%, which is by far the most he's ever played in his career. He ran 30 routes, so he's yet again a guy who 2 weeks ago was like the chalk tight end at value. Now that he's not going to be popular, it's worth taking a stand on if you want to just get to a punt tight end. I think he's one that's definitely viable. And then you just have a ton of these 3K wide receivers and Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson and guys that are just seeing a ton of split snaps and none of them really pop out with any upside. So it's really just punting Mike Gesicki and that's really about it from this Miami side.
Okay. Let's get to a game here that's going to have a ton of fantasy value and it's one that I think we really need to break down to figure out if it's worth eating the massive chalk on this Atlanta-Tampa game. And I think in many cases it certainly is. Excuse me. But let me just put it to you this way, Sal. The over-under in this one on a week where I mentioned this yesterday. Just backtrack for a second. Check this out. You've got the Bills and Broncos at 38.5. Cincy and Pittsburgh at 39. Chicago and the Giants at 40.5. Detroit and Chicago, or I'm sorry, where am I at here? Tennessee and Jacksonville at 41.5. Detroit and Washington at 41.5. That's what, 5 games there? I mean, you only have 2 games at 49 or higher. A couple of them are up there, but let's see. One game is above 50, and the next closest is the Eagles and Seattle Seahawks at 48. Because I had the 8 p.m. games in there, or I had the primetime games in there. When you remove those primetime games, this is a week with a lot of very low total games. So, of course, this 51 over-under is going to stand out. The Falcons and the Buccaneers. Bucs are a very turnover-prone team with Jameis Winston at the helm, but they're also a high-octane offense with a very concentrated offense in the respect of when it comes to targets. So you've got Julio Jones right now projected to be the highest-owned player on the week. I get that. I agree with that. As where I was totally off of Julio last week, I'm buying in big time this week in a much more appealing matchup. And then you have come down to the 4th highest-owned player on the slate. Of course, this is all subject to change, but I don't think it changes that much. Mike Evans at 21%. Come down not much further to number 9, Chris Godwin. Brian Hill right beneath him. And then the list goes on. Inside the top 20 is Calvin Ridley, is Jameis Winston, is Matt Ryan. You get the picture. Which of these guys do you think, hey, you know what? I don't care how high on they are. I'm getting to them because it's too good to ignore.
Yeah, so I think your point about the slate in general is really good. That there's really not a lot of other spots, and your opportunity cost of not playing this game is huge because you're not going to find much upside elsewhere in correlating. So, like when you say which of the spots am I fine with the ownership? It's honestly most of them. Like Julio Jones being 26%. It's a week where ownership to begin with is just balanced out a little bit above 15%. Being overowned is 15% on average, at least from what I indicate a little bit. So like guys above 20% or higher, only 4 or 5 players. So yeah, Julio, I'm fine with that 26%. Mike Evans, I'm fine with that 20%. We've seen Isaiah Oliver over the last month of the season actually perform a lot better, but he hasn't had the same type of matchups, nowhere near that Mike Evans will be. So Evans is a guy that I'm fine getting to. Julio is the priority from this game in general. Both sides stand out to me. Just on the Atlanta side, if you want to get any different at all, Russell Gage is 6% owned in a week where, as long as they're not leading by 2 or 3 scores, so instead of having 4 or 5 targets, he'll probably see 7 out of the slot, playing the Mohamed Sanu role, still at 3K. Should have had a touchdown last week, but ends up dropping it going to the ground. So that's one way to get different in a spot where Ridley's going to have some ownership. I think he's fine to go right back to, and Julio is probably the staple of a lot of stacks. I'm a little bit, if I had to pick one spot, I'm a little bit confused again by Brian Hill ownership. I know that he is I think he's $100 more expensive than last week.
Crazy.
Yeah, so we'll see how that moves. If
worse matchup too, like significantly worse matchup against the pass funnel defense.
Yeah, significantly worse matchup, and he had every opportunity in the world, even after running into the wall of what people are like. Obviously, dead last in DVOA was the Panthers last week, and people were telling me it was a smash spot. Like this is a guy who you don't have a lot of history on, and he was a guy that really was not beating out Ito Smith in the preseason, and even the third string backs in Olsen to an extent during the preseason. So you get Brian Hill here at 15% ownership. Last week I had none, and I'm fine once again having none of him in a spot where it's a tougher matchup. And even after having, it's not even like he only got 10 touches last week. They were ahead big. He had 16 carries. I don't want to harp too much on the one game sample, but there's really not much upside in my opinion for a guy who doesn't catch passes. And they did use 3 running backs last week. So if there was one spot to get away from, I would say it would be Hill again, who remains very much so touchdown upside only. And I think you can get that in other spots at lower ownership.
Think of it this way too, Sal. You could not have asked for a more favorable game script than last week. They had a big lead. They were they came into this game as 4-point dogs. It opened at 6.5, and then you saw it move to 4.5 or 4. So you could see there was some movement there, and rightfully so. But could you have asked for a better game script for Brian Hill?
No, you really couldn't have. And I get the fact that he had like a touchdown called back, which again, there was the penalty.
But it was at the goal line. Like, I mean,
exactly.
Anyone can do that.
Yeah, that too. And then also like the people who were saying that he would have ended up with 10 fantasy points and not winning the tournament. The exact same reason at like 40% owned. So he would have had to score like 18 at least to kind of trump a bunch of people who were. And the biggest thing was, and where it is this week as well, if he becomes 20+% owned, like what are the downsides of not rostering? He scores 13 or 14 fantasy points and you probably don't need him to win a tournament. The people that roster him don't get burnt, but like I feel very good about Brian Hill not scoring 20+ to just blow me out of the water, like people who didn't play Jalen Samuels about a month ago.
Yeah, no question, dude. I'm with you. In week 11, he had 2.27 yards per contact after attempt. So if you were to just take anybody with at least 10 carries and wonder where he ranks, well, he ranks right around Darrell Williams. So below him, actually. Where's Balaj? Oh, no, he only had 9, right? He had 9 for 9.
Yeah, 9 for 9.
Oh, my God.
14 total touches for 17 yards ceiling game for him.
Montgomery was dead last that week, 1.5 yards per contact after attempt on 14 carries. He's been really bad, man. Let me just ask you, I know I don't want to backtrack because we got a lot to cover still. How much do you think has to do with the run blocking scheme there?
For where? In Chicago?
In Chicago, yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely has to do a good amount there. I mean, he's like the type of runner that he is. He wants to embrace contact, but this is a different type of game than college where the guys are all just massively oversized. So I think he's just having a hard time adjusting to what the NFL is. He's still, like, in the beginning of the season was fine breaking tackles. I think it's just definitely run blocking scheme and 8-man boxes and nobody really being scared of Mitch Trubisky.
Okay. So let's do this. Let's just quickly circle back and make sure we hit on everything. Ridley was the guy last week that made a lot of sense with James Bradbury seeing Julio seeing Bradbury. I don't have an issue with Ridley this week, but it's certainly one where I heavily favor Julio Jones. And I also think, Ridley coming off a big week, there will be some recency bias here. And I don't mind, after seeing his price tag go up $1,000, Sal, on DraftKings, saying, okay, you're telling me that Julio's only $1,500 more than Calvin Ridley. Easy decision. Russell Gage, like you said, at super low ownership. I'm not opposed to it. He should still get some opportunities. He had a touchdown call back, and he's dirt cheap, especially if Deontay Johnson plays and I don't get to roster Johnny Holton. But on the Atlanta side of the ball, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, just take a look at all of the numbers, and you will see that even when these guys have bad weeks, it doesn't mean anything for the week going forward. What I mean by that is simply they are two of the top guys in yards this season. They're two of the top guys in fantasy points this season. Last year probably knocked them down, or last week probably knocked them down a little bit, but because they were second and third respectively. No, they still are. They're second and third respectively in PPR scoring at their position this year. Amazing. Michael Thomas is first with 40 more than the next closest player. But yeah, you look at receiving yards, and you've got Mike Evans second. You've got Chris Godwin third. It's insane the amount of opportunities they see each week. They both have 7 touchdowns. Of course, Mike Evans is more of an air yards guy. He's going to see more big play opportunities, but there will always be opportunities. There will always be the possibility, I should say, that the tournament winning lineup has Winston, Evans, and Godwin in it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And this week, even more, it's really difficult to see where else you go if you wanted to stack the Jameis Winston side, because we don't really know what to make of OJ Howard. If he's going to continue to be benched or just lose snaps, and based on what we saw last week and how they've handled him, he can go right back out there and just play. Or
he thought he was a Harlem Globetrotter last week.
Yeah, he thought he was a Harlem Globetrotter trying to catch it behind his back, leads to an interception. But he would be the other guy that I would go back to like I did last week, but it's harder to have confidence in it. Maybe it's a contrarian move to include him in groups, but yeah, it's Evans and then Godwin in that order for me. That's what ownership is showing right now. You have Mike Evans, who continues to see a ton of red zone targets, 34.1% of the team's red zone targets this year against Isaiah Oliver, who over the last 3 games has improved, but overall still I would say at best average to bad quarterback. So you get a guy who's going to see a ton of red zone targets in Mike Evans, who has 36 pounds on Oliver. So just touchdown upside in this matchup for Evans is fantastic. Godwin, nothing bad to say about him. We'll probably get Kendall Sheffield in the slot now, who's taken over in the slot for Atlanta for KZ. And yeah, it's a spot where I think Godwin is completely fine. I prefer Evans. I like running back the Atlanta side a little bit more, just so it's easier to kind of just have a Godwin in the lineup or an Evans and not really stack both of them. So you have salary to spend elsewhere on maybe like a McCaffrey. But yeah, they're both fine for me. Nothing else stands out. I might take more risks with OJ Howard moving forward if we get no more news and just assume he's going to take over a similar role and see if he got taught a lesson, even though it's like the 3rd lesson this year for him. So I don't know what to make of that all that much. Do you have any read on what's happening with OJ Howard?
I'm going to go ahead and assume that he has once again, put himself into NFL purgatory, where he is on the field at times. He is, of course, you're not going to not dress the guy. So he's going to be there, but his involvement in the offense, here's how I see it. And I think I try and take a rational approach. If there wasn't legitimate concern that he would see, 0 targets again this week, I would have felt that way if after making one single mistake, he wasn't benched. If Mike Evans or Chris Godwin makes that mistake, they are not benched. They go back to them. Bruce Arians does not say, get your ass off the field. Take off your helmet. That wouldn't happen. So if you have such a hair trigger response when there's one mistake made by, a very athletic and talented tight end who you clearly haven't favored this season, I think you have to be concerned that Sal, he made one bad play and didn't see another target the rest of the game, while his counterpart Cameron Brate saw 14 and a career high.
Yep, yeah, and a record high, I think, for Tampa Bay for tight ends. So that was just rubbing his nose in it a little bit there. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I agree that he was probably on a short leash and he got yanked. So I try and think of it like it's definitely different. Just the whole situation, like Seattle with Chris Harson, they have just a ton of faith in him, giving him more usage. And as a running back, he's going to be needed more. So yeah, I think it's a worse situation here for OJ Howard just moving forward, which will probably lead me just to get to more Atlanta stacks in general and run it back with Tampa Bay guys.
Okay. And I'm assuming you got nothing on Ronald Jones either, right?
Yeah, no interest there. I mean, it just seems like there's always like a week where he does well and everybody thinks it's the transformation. And there was a time this year where I thought that too, but it just goes back down to being even snap counts with these other guys.
Okay, so do this for me. Top plays from this game across the board, like price tag agnostic, format agnostic.
Okay, yeah. So Julio Evans. So I'll go Julio Evans, Godwin, Matt Ryan, Russell Gage, and Jameis.
Okay.
And then Ridley at the end of it.
I'm in this. That's exactly my rankings too, so I won't even repeat that. Let's talk about New Orleans and Carolina. Here's another game that should be relatively popular. 47 over under. Saints are 8.5 point favorites. Kyle Allen was outright dog shit last week. Still due for 300 plus yards, but man, what a bad performance. Equally remarkable that McCaffrey can put up 33 PPR points without getting into the end zone. That is simply how good this man is. But DJ Moore has been great too. I love what I've seen from him. He got some looks in the red zone last week, wasn't able to capitalize. No fault of his own. If you looked at those targets, they were basically uncatchable targets. But he did see, I think it was two. Yeah, he's seen multiple red zone targets in back-to-back weeks. This is a very difficult matchup that he's going to get, though, against Lattimore. And Michael Thomas, you and I discussed this, but I want to break it down a little bit more because to me, it's one of the most interesting spots to try and predict and analyze going into week 12. Will Michael Thomas see shadow treatment from James Bradberry? Reason I think it's weird is because Bradbury's played 1% of snaps in the slot. Now, you and I talked on Tuesday. Most of the number one receivers he's faced this year are outside receivers, and other number one receivers that weren't that great. Michael Thomas, according to Pro Football Focus, they have him in caps, meaning this should be a shadow matchup, but he's a guy that runs 29% of his routes in the slot, 44% to the left side, 20% to the right side. I don't know if it's crazy to think that in a spot where if you slow Michael Thomas down, you can beat the Saints, that they say, listen, Bradbury is on Michael Thomas every single snap.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance you see that. I think the ones that would happen in the slot, like going into this, Bradbury's been fantastic. Thomas has been the best receiver in football probably. And you get
He definitely has.
Definitely. Right. And you get a guy who, in Thomas, I think just coming into the matchup has the upper hand, obviously knowing what he's going to do on offense and being that talented. And when he goes into the slot, I think he has an even better advantage. So I think the matchup is surely going to be tougher in terms of the bigger plays, but just the amount of press coverage he sees, which is very minimal, and the routes he runs, it just opens him up to catch balls. Like he's had at least 8 receptions in, I believe, 7 straight games now. He's on pace for 150 receptions. He's just been phenomenal. So it's a spot that Thomas, I don't think gets shut down ever by Bradbury here, but surely can be limited in big plays and made his day a little bit more difficult. But I think the biggest piece of it is he's still 9,300. The price point came down a ton, as it should have probably, where he was priced. He's still producing, but he's just priced at a point where it makes him almost impossible when he was 9,900 to be needed in a winning lineup unless he drops 40 plus. So he's once again $1,300 more expensive than Julio this week at similar ownership. It's just to a point where, yeah, in cash games, he probably more consistently gets you 25 points, but now he has as tough of a matchup as you probably can get against Bradbury, one of the lower passer ratings in the league. And it's a wide receiver position where if it's not Julio, if it's not Godwin, if it's not Evans, there's like a group of 20 guys who can score 25 plus fantasy points in a given week. So the opportunity cost of rostering a very expensive $1,300 more than Julio Jones, the next closest guy, is so much. Like I probably once again won't have much Michael Thomas. And for the people who were telling me last week, but McCaffrey's 10-5, it's the same thing. It's not. There's like 4 or 5 guys who can score 25 plus points because of how many running back by committees there are in this league and just skillful running backs, where if I know if McCaffrey gets me 30, there's probably only one guy or two maybe outscoring him that week. Michael Thomas can have 2 or 3 guys like last week, John Brown and some other players, outscore or score very similar to him for almost half the price.
Yep, very good points. And the big thing is, like last week with Julio, did I expect Julio to be shut down? No. Do I expect him to be limited? Yes. Michael Thomas is still going to get his, right? To echo what you said, he's still going to get his. But Michael Thomas will need to get his and then someone else's in order to pay this price tag off. And when you talk from a tournament standpoint, is Michael Thomas the most reliable receiver week to week in cash games? No question. Absolutely. In tournaments, can you roster him every week? Sure. But Mike Evans has 50 fantasy point upside? Like, no question. He has let's say 40. He has a 48 fantasy point game and a 46 this year and a 39, right? He has a way lower floor than Thomas, but their ceiling, you could almost argue that Evans has a higher ceiling. Chris Godwin has a 34 and a 44, a 29, a 28, big time upside. Julio Jones, big time upside. So if you're talking tournaments, we know at least that while the likelihood that Evans is giving you the same reliable production of Thomas last week is much lower, they both are very capable of putting up huge numbers, and you're getting a $2,000 plus discount on guys like Evans, Godwin, and Beckham, $1,300 discount on Michael Thomas. You know that those ceilings are still very, very high in their respective matchups too.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think Michael Thomas is ceiling more times than not. I mean, like, ultra ceiling is around 40, like those guys.
Yeah.
But more times than not in this matchup, like, I have Julio Jones projected. They're both similar ownership, you see. I have him only projected for about 3 fantasy points less than Michael Thomas, and that's just the next guy up there. For the price discount, it's a much better point per dollar play. And if he just hits anything near a ceiling, you need Thomas to go for probably 30 to 35 and every other receiver to not touch 30 fantasy points for him to really be needed in your lineups. And that's just too many right things that have to happen for you. I think the guy's great, but until he comes back down to like 8,500 or below, or maybe 8,700 or below, it's really tough to see him just outbeating every other wide receiver on a team that, again, it's not a running back that's doing a running back by committee. It's a wide receiver that has to beat one guy for a 60-yard touchdown to score 25 points.
I'm with you. I do really like Alvin Kamara, though. I think this is certainly one of those spots where Alvin Kamara can dominate. I do expect Latavius Murray to still get opportunities on the ground. I expect him, if Alvin Kamara sees 15 carries, I'd put Latavius Murray around 10. But he has dominance in the passing game, and Carolina on the ground is such a bad run defense anyway that Alvin Kamara at his price point, he's come up, but 8,200 to me is still reasonable. And then even if Michael Thomas is even somewhat limited by Bradbury, a lot of that's going to be funneled through Kamara. I really like him this week. What about you?
Yeah, I really like Kamara too. It seems like the ownership's trailing it. There's just really no great value on the slate, at least at a lot of these positions, unless you're punting tight end. So what we're seeing right now is a low ownership number on McCaffrey, which we are about to get to. But yeah, if you're not playing McCaffrey, Kamara's the next best option here. You have Carolina continuing to struggle on the ground. Even on a bad week, I think just based on the snap counts he's playing, if it remains at the 65% role like he had with Ingram in the past, and we've seen for a lot more stable times this year with Latavius Murray, you're going to get 4 to 5 receptions out of him just historically, the way that he plays on those snaps. And then you probably get 14 touches. So on the ground, you're looking at 18 to 20 touches against one of the bottom ranked DVOA defenses for Alvin Kamara at only 8,200. And then obviously all the upside in the world for touchdowns in this offense that's very much concentrated with him and Thomas. So yeah, I think Alvin Kamara is fairly too underpriced in this matchup. And I think the ownership's okay.
Okay. Now, looking towards the other side of this game, Carolina, do you go to Christian McCaffrey here? A tough spot, but you would imagine the only chance they have of getting close to a win is through Christian McCaffrey. DJ Moore in a tough spot. Curtis Samuel, I think you talked about it on Tuesday. You're just not seeing that upside from Samuel, and you pretty much need a touchdown. He does lead all Carolina receivers with 12 red zone targets this year, but that's not saying a lot. And then Greg Olsen, very up and down performances from this guy to be expected. If you're willing to pay that price point, I guess it's okay, but I'm not enamored with anybody here outside of the usual Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, McCaffrey at 8%, I just love the play. Like if he was once again 25%, I'd say, okay, that's about what I feel good about, maybe a little bit more. But at 8%, I'll say the same things. I know the matchup is more difficult. He has yet to face the Saints. He'll face them and again in the coming weeks. But look, he's faced San Francisco this year, dropped 30. He's faced Tennessee, who's one of the better defenses on the ground, has dropped 40-plus fantasy points. Houston, who was better at that time when they were healthier, 33. It's a spot where I know Tampa Bay shut him down for 3 quarters. He scored 21 against them the second time for a floor game. It's a spot that if he's going to be 8% owned, and we just saw what he did when his team scored 3 total points and barely can move the ball, and he did it in the receiving game, did not score his own touchdown in that one because the team didn't score. Otherwise, he probably does. Yeah, at 8% owned, I know that there's really no value, but I still think you can make it work. I think there's enough punt tight end options that have upside. I think there's enough 5K running backs you can pair him with to get to a McCaffrey this week and still like the stack you're getting. I understand the lower ownership because, yes, this price point is at, again, the third straight week, 10-5, and this is the toughest matchup he'll see during those weeks. But again, Tennessee, 3 weeks back when it was 10-5 or 10,000 flat, really tough matchup, scores 40 points. So he is matchup proof in my opinion. I'm not really concerned about it. I don't think you get any worse as an offensive output than you did last week from this team where he scored 30 points. So at 8%, I'll happily have triple the field, if not more, as long as you get any sort of value, which I think we have some.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the next game here? Got 5 to go?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk Washington and Detroit. Before we do, 2 things I want to point out. One, if you use the sign-up code NFL Strategy at awesemo.com/join, you get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus membership. Ownership projections, player projections, top stack tool, boom or bust tool, everything we have for NFL, NBA, all of our sports, premium content, and of course, there's the Fantasy Cruncher add-on as well. That's 50% off your first month by using the sign-up code NFL Strategy, all one word. Or you can get that weekly pass, $395 Express Pass, which is also solid if you are a little hesitant, you're protective of that wallet, and you want to be sure that you're confident in the product that you're buying. If you also want to kind of vet what we have, go to the bottom of awesemo.com/join and check out all of the video tutorials we have on our top tools and most popular tools like the ownership projections, the top stack tool, the player projections. And we have we have our premium Slack chat too. So if you sign up using the code NFL Strategy, join us in our Slack, our premium Slack chat, say what's up, and we will be happy to show you around. So yeah, check that out. NFL Strategy, 50% off your first month. Also a giveaway today. If you want a shot at getting, if you want a shot at winning a pretty solid prize here. So 2019 NFL Awesemo Plus Pass, right? For the rest of the season, totally free. We're going to take one random winner who gets the correct answer to the question, who scores the most fantasy points in tonight's NFL Showdown game? All you have to do is answer that, retweet, like, and respond to the tweet at Awesemo_com or at Awesemo NFL, and follow at Awesemo_com and Awesemo NFL, and you will be entered to win. While you're at it, don't forget to follow Sal Vetri and myself, Dave Loughran, LOUGHY_D on Twitter. You won't regret it. All right, Sal, let's do it. 5 games to go, Detroit and Washington. Bo Scarborough, how about this, man? Third in yards after contact per attempt on 14 carries. 4.07 yards per contact after attempt. Not bad. He had a 23-yard run there. Was pretty impressive. Number 1 and number 2 in that category, though, Jonathan Williams and Marlon Mack, right? Both of whom play for the Colts. I wish they were on this slate, but that's not the case. Bo Scarborough is, though, and he's going up against the Washington Redskins. This is a pretty muddled backfield, and I think it's worth breaking down. But what we saw last week was Bo Scarborough with the only 2 running back opportunities in the red zone. And as far as snap counts go, he played 49% of snaps compared to 29% from Ty Johnson, 23 from McKissick, 3 from Nick Bawden. So yeah, there you have it. There's a lot of guys, a lot of mouths to feed, but Bo Scarborough was first in line last week. Does that do anything for you against a bad Washington team?
Yeah, so I think it definitely means something because he was first in line and he at least looked good. Overall, doesn't finish with a crazy stat line, but has looked better than what they've had back there and gets tackled on the 1-yard line. Would have had another touchdown in that game. So yeah, Scarborough, he's just unowned right now. So that's what makes him appealing on a week where if you want to fit in McCaffrey and some top end receivers, you're going to need value somewhere. And if he plays another 50% of the snaps, he's going to be very touchdown dependent. Didn't do much in the receiving game with Ty Johnson and McKissick behind him. So at 0.1% owned, I'm okay with if people that want to roster him at really any capacity at that point and just get some shares of him and you have them in your lineups and your levels above the field. I really don't have a ton of interest, but you don't have to have a ton of interest to have 3% of the guys. So at a cheap price point, I think he's okay to get to. The concern is, though, that he's very much so might have had like the best opportunity last week. You get 15 carries, see what you do with them, because McKissick and Ty Johnson probably aren't leaving this backfield. Johnson another week healthier, and those are by far the better pass catching backs at least what you've seen out of Scarborough in college and also last week alone, how they used him. So like at best, you probably get 15 carries from him and then just see what he can do with them. So at 0.1% owned, it's probably at the price point okay. It's just not something that I'm trying to get into my lineups because I think this week you could easily see it just be very much even across the board in snaps.
Okay, yeah. Reasonable though to assume that on one hand, on one hand you make the argument that you just did, and I don't think there's any real argument against something like that playing out. But I'll also say that they are facing the Redskins. They are 3.5-point road favorites. Jeff Driscoll is their quarterback. So if they can control this game on the ground and just eat up the clock, it makes sense. Another thing, with the way Dwayne Haskins has played, I don't like to predict this stuff, but it's very possible that he puts that defense in very unfavorable or unenviable situations with turnovers in their inside their own 20 or just 3 and outs where you're punting and putting the Lions at the 50. So I do think there will be opportunities to score for Scarborough in the event that he still gets the first and second down work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that's definitely why he's in play. Like, this isn't Brian Hill last week. If Scarborough was to come in 20% owned, it's a terrible play. But
of course. No question.
Yeah, when you can get any percentage of him that you want and you're above the field and there's nothing else owning him, then yeah, if that game script plays out that Haskins is terrible, which can happen, and then you just have a spot where you're up 10 and he's running the ball 18, 20 times, then yeah, it's a nice play to have. And yeah, lower ownership, probably look into him more, but I think it's worth a rostering in some lineups since nobody's on him.
Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about the rest of this team. When Chris Spags and I discussed it yesterday, looking at maybe some lower owned guys, one of them that could be very interesting to me, Sal, Kenny Golladay. Right now we're projecting him at 1% ownership. Now he's going to have some rough games, especially with Driscoll at the helm, particularly last week where his only reception I think came on that final drive. But he had 9 targets the game before that. He's faced 2 defenses that are, one's very good, one's at least decent. And his price is to some extent reasonable. Do I love it here? No. But if I come in at like 7% Kenny Golladay when he's 1% owned against Washington, and how many times have you pointed out this season that Josh Norman has not been good? I don't know if Norman's going to be, I think he should be seeing Kenny Golladay. Whether it's shadow treatment or not, it's not a bad matchup. We just saw Sam Darnold throw 4 touchdowns against this team. So I actually don't think it's crazy to get maybe a few team stacks for Detroit, avoid the backfield altogether, and hope that Driscoll can hook up with Marvin Jones and Kenny Golladay. What are you doing with this Detroit team? And feel free to hit on Washington afterwards because I don't think we'll have much there.
Yeah, not much there. I think that, Galladay's interesting, like you said. Last week, I thought he was interesting too, but at the 7K price point, it was tougher to get to. You see Marvin Jones get both of the touchdowns. Marvin Jones' price point comes up and stabilizes in the 6K range. I don't have much interest in Jones, who's seen low volume over the last 2 weeks, surviving on a couple of touchdowns, and he just stays at a price point where I don't think he's going to pay it off without those touchdowns or moving forward. Whereas Golladay coming down, he's going to be the guy who gets Josh Norman against him. 133 passer rating against, 7 touchdowns allowed this season, Norman. He's just been very bad. Marvin Jones will be on the other side. Norman plays on one side of the field. That's where Golladay runs a lot of his routes, and just size-wise, Golladay will get Norman. So yeah, it's a good matchup for Golladay. And just trying to take it out of this game and compare it to another spot, you have Mitch Trubisky starting this week, Allen Robinson at a similar price point. It's a spot where I don't think it's too much different than Jeff Driscoll with Kenny Golladay at a similar price point for the skill sets of these receivers and the skill sets of their quarterback. I don't think Mitch Trubisky is levels above Jeff Driscoll at this point. So yeah, I think that Golladay is in play. If I think Robinson is in play and at low ownership and really unowned, I think that Golladay makes for a nice GPP type of play. Driscoll, for the most part, hasn't been fantastic, relying a lot on his mobility to keep drives alive, which is good for the overall offense. But he can at least get a receiver the ball. And we didn't see it as much last week. The week before, Golladay has a nice touchdown grab. But yeah, if he's 1% owned, you're not really risking too much by going to him in some lineups. It's really just Golladay from this team that stands out, and the points that we made on Scarborough. Driscoll, I know people want to get to because of the rushing upside. He's like a low-end cash play at best for me.
You know what's kind of crazy? Marvin Jones has a 12% touchdown rate this year. Kenny Golladay, 10.5.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, yeah, that 4 touchdown game is just – how many does he have on the season? He has double digits?
They both have 8.
Okay.
But they're both in the 70s or actually 76 targets for Golladay. Marvin Jones has 68. But yeah, I mean, the concentration of red zone looks for these two guys is kind of fascinating, man. You know, you look at red zone targets, they both have 12 on the season. Danny Amendola has 6. No other wide receiver has any. So, yeah, we'll see what Driscoll does. But, yeah, for me, it's Galladay. Are you – and feel free to just skip over it if you want. Anything for Washington for you?
No, nothing for Washington. Terry McLaurin's going to get sliced, so Paul Richardson back will take the other rookie Harmon off the field, and then just a three-headed backfield where Geis seems to be just like the most flashy back, but you have Chris Thompson practicing this week. We'll take back over for Wendell Smallwood, if not all 4 of them active, and it just makes it disgusting. Adrian Peterson sat out for just sort of a normal rest day of practice, so nothing to really see there. They probably all get like 6 or 8 touches, and just nothing from Washington is interesting to me.
Let's talk about the Jets in Oakland then. Sam Darnold, I just mentioned it, coming off a 4-touchdown performance. His first game with even 3 or more touchdowns this season, that was against the Washington Redskins. Now he gets an Oakland team that, for all intents and purposes, has been pretty bad at defending the pass, unless, of course, you're facing Ryan Finley, then you look competent, but we all know that isn't the case. Football Outsiders has them 29th in pass defense DVOA this season. Pro Football Focus has them bottom 10. So not very good. And maybe Darnold has an opportunity to build on last week's performance in another solid matchup. Number one, do you think he can? And number two, if he does, here's where the problem comes into play. Are you willing to pay above $6,000 for Crowder? Do you want to take a stab at Robbie Anderson, who had 1 reception? It was a touchdown, but only 1 reception on 3 targets last time. You want to go to Demaryius Thomas at 3,800? Like, what are your thoughts here on the passing game?
Yeah, so my thoughts on the passing game are that earlier in the week I thought I'd have more interest, but now there's just not much at all in it. Darnold in like season longs I think is fine. Cash, there's better options, and then in tournaments, yeah, I don't really like the stacking options. You have for like a third straight week now, or second straight week, me saying this with Crowder, but the price point keeps coming up. Now it's at an all-time high for Jamison Crowder, like in his DraftKings career, for a price point on this guy, and he's just relying on touchdowns. And now not only does he need to get you touchdowns, he also has to rely on his receiving totals, because he's at a price point where a 4-catch, 50-yard day for a touchdown, it might not get you there in tournaments, and it probably doesn't. So more times than not, just where his ADOT is in the 7 air yards per target in that range, he has to get these touchdowns. He's had them 3 straight weeks. If you want to keep betting on touchdowns at a top dollar and all-time high price point on the guy, it seems risky and that it won't work out more times than not if you always make that move on guys. So Crowder's not interesting to me. You get Robbie Anderson, who, yeah, he just isn't seeing any volume. And there's a big reason why. The last 3 weeks, Bell's role has reemerged here after talking to Gaze. He's back in the receiving role, and he has 67 total rushing attempts, so they're going more towards the ground. You see more of Ryan Griffin emerging. You see more of Crowder getting a connection with Darnold, and Robbie Anderson's becoming an afterthought in this offense. And also on the outside, Trevion Mullen, a rookie cornerback, took over for Garyon Conley when he was traded. After looking bad in like one game, now since then, he's looked pretty good. He's only given up 217 yards on the season. And the crazy thing is on 32 receptions. So what that means is he's giving up 6.8 yards per reception, which is the exact opposite of what Robbie Anderson does. Like, he's not going to beat you just short the entire game. So the upside here for Anderson is that there really is none. And if I don't want to pay a top dollar price tag for Crowder, it does not leave me with much or any of Sam Darnold. It's really just Le'Veon Bell, 67 rushes in the last 3 weeks, and that 6.4K price tag on DraftKings is, I would consider that value for this type of a slate.
Okay, so would you say he's a priority would you say he's a top 5 running back for you this week?
Yeah, I think Bell is. You get like McCaffrey up top, Kamara, and then I like Bell in that mid-range. And then on the bottom end right now, Lindsey stands out. So those are like some of the, I'd say, top 5, 6 priorities. They're in there for me this week. Just the volume. I know the snap count dropped last week, but you still see 20 touches for the guy. Even if the snap count drops, he's still going to be scheming for when he's on the field.
Okay. Oakland, Darren Waller. We still have him projected to get decent ownership. And of course, a lot of that has to do with how weak this position is. But look, if he's coming in at 15% again at this price, I don't think I'm going to be there.
Yeah, it's Darren Waller. I prefer Ertz for, more ownership, but also just more stability, even if he does still see double teams. It's a spot where the slate just lines up to punt the position. Waller's still a great tight end, but yeah, it's a spot that he should see a little bit more increase in his volume because it's a tough matchup on the ground. So you might see a little bit less out of Josh Jacobs, which means more than the average 31 pass attempts per car this year, so per game this season. So I do think Waller has upside there, but anything in the secondary when he runs down the field, he'll get Jamal Adams, which is just a terrifying matchup. Only 123 yards so far this season allowed to tight ends from Adams. So yeah, I think it kind of neutralizes itself out. I think the price point is okay on him. He's probably a little bit overpriced for what he's been doing lately in this offense that wants to be very, very much balanced, if not a little bit more run heavy lately. So, yeah, Carr, it's a good matchup for him, but you're never going to see a tournament winning score out of Derek Carr, probably with the weapons that he has. Tyrell is just not getting a ton of volume. So it's a spot that tough matchup for Jacobs. Waller's the only thing that stands out, and I probably don't get much of the team in general.
Okay. I'm with you here. So I'm good to move on to Philly and Seattle. 3 games to go here. Making decent time. Usually we run at about an hour and a half. So we're on track to do just that. Appreciate everyone sticking with us throughout this as always. Got the best viewers in the biz. Philly and Seattle. Just a brutal spot for the Eagles right now. Alshon Jeffrey and Jordan Howard were participating in individual practice. So they were limited on Wednesday. Of course, Howard dealing with the shoulder and Alshon with the ankle. I don't know what to expect from them, but I'll say this. I don't like Zach Ertz, of course, is one guy that stands out because you're going to have to pepper him with targets. Whether or not you got double coverage, like he's seen double-digit targets in back-to-back weeks. He's hauled in 18 of 22 targets over that span, 197 yards and a touchdown over his last 2 games. And that came against New England and Chicago, 2 very, very good pass defenses. So, of course, God, I just said of course 5 times in one rant. Of course, Zach Ertz is in play, but it is at least interesting, Sal, that Miles Sanders, I mentioned this earlier, ran some of the most routes of anybody at his position last week. To me, there's at least value in saying, hey, if Miles Sanders is, but he hit the tent too. He was off the field for a little while with some injury, but the only guys that ran more routes than him last week were Christian McCaffrey at 45, Ezekiel Elliott at 39, and then you had Sanders at 37. So, if he comes in and he sees 13 attempts, I think that's about what I'm projecting him for, and then is running 37, 35 routes, there might be some value there if he comes in at 1% ownership. But I'm really just reaching because outside of Ertz, I don't love anything. The reason, though, that I am at least forcing myself to look at this more is because the game has a 48 total. The Eagles are actually 2-point favorites with a 25 implied total, and the Seahawks are traveling west to east. So maybe Vegas knows something we don't, and I'm going to pay attention.
I think, yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Cool. I think the points on Sanders are good to mention, especially at 1% ownership. Like, if there is something going on with Aguilar after missing practice on Wednesday, then like who's catching anything in the short to intermediate range aside from Sanders and these tight ends, even if Howard does return? So yeah, at that 1%, again, we're kind of scraping for value at running back. I prefer Lindsey in this price range, but
Sanders me too, by the way, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. But Sanders is sort of a tournament option that if he's in your player pool and you get some of him, it's okay. I like the upside there. You saw that Philly was just running a season high in terms of 2 tight end sets. They led the league last year. They ran a season high dating back to last season. You had Ertz on the field 89% of the time last week and Goddard 81%. Goddard, I mean, the usage that this guy is having, you have to continue to consider him at the price points that he is on DraftKings. He ran 35 routes last week to Ertz's 43. So even though he's on the field the same amount of times, he's not running as many routes, and you would expect that, but he's going to be on the field and he's going to be used in the red zone too this year. He's had 49 less routes run this season than Ertz, and he still has only 3 less red zone targets. Yep. So he's definitely active on this team. It's really, we'll see what happens. Individual drills for Jeffrey Wednesday. We'll see what happens with those guys. But yeah, the point total, you have to look at it. For me, I prioritize it both of these tight ends, Ertz and then Goddard, and then probably Sanders after that. If indeed Howard suits up just based on the role he had before he got hurt, I'll have interest there at 4,800. Seattle's run defense is top 10 in the league right now, so it's kind of scary. But again, like if you're trying to fit in McCaffrey, you need like 2 or 3 of these value guys in your pool to get there.
Right, and maybe you'll find them here. I don't know. Obviously wouldn't have any interest in Sanders if Jordan Howard plays, but, right now I'm assuming he won't. Seattle. We talked about how much better Janoris Jenkins has been. Jalen Mills has also been very good since returning, and it's actually helped to bolster that defense, which had really struggled in pass defense. What do you think here for Seattle? Chris Carson also is just somebody that every week I'm at least willing to take a look, because his volume is so heavy, almost regardless of the game script. But I don't see this getting away from either team. He is projected for 14% ownership, though, which is going to push me away from him more than it would if he was lesser owned. What about you for Seattle?
Yeah, so I'm kind of where the field is on this in terms of not having much interest. I was hoping the field would, so I would just have like a natural pivot point here from the field. But yeah, you have Russell Wilson as a top end quarterback on a team with not the greatest of implied totals. As an underdog is nice, so he's forced to throw a little bit more, which makes Carson even more worrisome as an option this week. But yeah, so Russell Wilson leads the slate in fantasy points per attempt, but the Eagles secondary has improved so much over the last month because of Mills and just getting healthier. Yeah, it's 18th ranked overall, which is nowhere near where it was 6 weeks ago. And over the last month of the season, it's actually a top 10 secondary. So you get Russell Wilson as an underdog, not a great team implied total. Tyler Lockett's banged up and will have to go up against a very nice matchup, but he's expensive in the slot against Maddox as long as Maddox is healthy. On the outside, you have DK Metcalf against Jalen Mills, who you were saying. Mills has a 43.9 pass rating against since returning. That is 7th best in the league, only giving up 111 yards on 11 targets. DK Metcalf runs 58% of his routes on the left side. Mills has been on the left side 91% of the time, so that'll be your matchup there. Metcalf is pretty much off the board for me, so stacking Russell Wilson doesn't seem too appealing at this price point. You have Ed Dixon likely returning, which will hurt Jacob Hollister, who's been well for them in a couple of games at tight end. It's really just Tyler Lockett if you want to get there as sort of a one-off. I always think there's upside, especially now at low ownership. The price point makes it difficult, but Russell Wilson plus Tyler Lockett stocks or stacks always have upside. It's just a matter of if you can get it to correlate and hit at these price points, it makes it tough. So, yeah, where the ownership's coming in, it makes sense. There's just not a nice overall team total for what these price points are coming in at. And, again, a sneaky bad matchup against the Eagles secondary.
Jacksonville, Tennessee. Well, another game with a low total, 2 workhorse running backs, and then somebody like DJ Shark, who has been pretty productive this season coming off a monster game and certainly helping people to win tournaments. 15 targets in Nick Foles' first game back for DJ Shark. D.D. Westbrook was limited to 4 receptions on 6 targets. Shark clearly appearing to be not always the go-to guy, at least under Minshew he wasn't, but definitely the higher upside, higher ceiling guy, just with more big play abilities. I guess let's talk about the running backs on both sides first. I never have an issue getting the Fournette at this price point, just given the massive workload. Derrick Henry, I don't see myself having as much of because at such a similar price to Fournette. I'll take Fournette's low production, but still valuable 6 or 7 targets per game.
Yeah, exactly. Fournette's definitely the priority between these 2 running backs for me. Fournette's kind of on that range of the 6th guy that I have interest in a lot. It's just too much opportunity to pass up. You get a really bad, though, matchup on the offensive line here against the defensive line of Tennessee. And when you're already seeing a guy in Fournette seeing a ton of 8-man boxes, and now it's an even worse matchup, that's worrisome. They said that they did not give Fournette enough opportunities, and I'd agree with them, only 15 touches last week. But even if it gets back up to what you're used to, 22 to 22 opportunities a game, or 20 to 22 opportunities a game, we already know what to expect there. Probably just he needs to rely on that volume, and if he finds the end zone, he's great. He's too cheap for how much work he gets, but I am concerned about the matchup. Pro Football Focus has it as a minus 18% lower than average, so a negative 18% matchup in terms of their offensive line versus Tennessee's defensive line. And this offensive line has already been naturally bad with a 3.7 adjusted line play ranks as one of the worst on the slate. So Fournette's not a priority for me, but I agree that in this price range, finally in a week where he's not picking up nearly as much ownership as he has in past weeks, it does stand out to me. And then for Derrick Henry, yeah, I'm just not going to get there because where he's priced on the slate, if he was down in the low 6K, 5K range like it was a couple weeks ago, it's maybe worth consideration in a somewhat nice matchup, around neutral matchup against Jacksonville this week. Tennessee and Ryan Tannehill have a terrible pass protection matchup, so you would imagine they lean on the run more, but they always do. It's just you have Le'Veon Bell for $500 cheaper than Henry, who's going to see probably same, if not more, overall touches in 4 receptions or so. So I'm just going to get to Le'Veon Bell, even at the higher ownership over Henry. You can always try and predict the Henry 100-yard touchdown or 2 games, but it just seems like the worst spot this week for it to happen.
Yeah, and he's just too close in price to Fournette. As you mentioned, you could pay down a little bit for Le'Veon Bell. He's kind of in no man's land, which makes it more difficult to get to. What are your thoughts on the passing weapons? Let me quickly, anything for Tennessee here?
No, nothing here from Tennessee. Delaney Walker and Corey Davis finally practiced. If Delaney Walker is a full go, I'm even skeptical to roster him. We saw before Delaney Walker got hurt, there was 2 or 3 weeks of Jonnu Smith just playing more snaps as a blocking tight end because that's where this team wanted to go. And with the transition over to Tannehill at quarterback, I imagine they still stay in that type of department. So you might only get Delaney Walker playing 30-40% of the snaps and just more blocking going on with Jonnu Smith at tight end. So no real interest there. Corey Davis coming back against AJ Boye, not a great spot for him.
I'm completely off of anything from Tennessee.
Yep.
If anybody, it would be Henry, but even so, it's tough to get to. Jacksonville, do you have interest in DJ Shark here at a pretty decent price point and projected ownership right now of 5.9%?
Yeah, I definitely do. So last week we saw the 8 catches on 15 targets from Foles in his return. They had a little bit of a connection in the first week where he catches a touchdown. So yeah, I do like DJ Shark this week as well. It's sort of a 5%, like double that is where my interest is to give an idea on it. 10%, 15% as a wide receiver. You get no Malcolm Butler, who's been bad on IR. You get Adore Jackson against from DJ Shark, who Jackson has been the best cornerback for Tennessee, but relative to the league, he's slightly below average this season. Or right around, slightly below average, a 92 passer rating against. But Shark's skill set, I feel a little bit confident in that. He'll move into the slot about 25% of his routes. So Shark's a fine play. I think Chris Conley has sort of a punt type of a wide receiver. He also has shown connection in the preseason. And now last week with Foles, 8 targets, caught 6 of them for 58 yards. It's a nice week there for a $4,100 receiver against Malcolm Butler's backup in LaShawn Sims, who has 128 pass rating against and about 3 games worth of coverage snaps. So I actually think I prioritize Conley as sort of a puntier type of a wide receiver to fit in more Christian McCaffrey type lineups. But in lineups where I have the money, Shark is a guy that I like to get to. Dede in the slot, Logan Ryan has been very good. His numbers in terms of overall yardage and receptions are high, but you pointed this out earlier in the year. He's just so targeted heavily. Teams will target him, even though he has been well. He has an 87.6 pass rating against. That's fine. It just looks like he's bad because there's big numbers against him, but there's also a lot more volume going his way. So he shut down Dede a couple weeks back. Well, Dede had like a floor game of 5 catches for 46 yards. So I don't really have a stance on Dede. If you get to some of him, I think it's okay, but he's definitely not a priority. All these guys are just secondary options. I think Conley's a nice lower-end wide receiver play.
Okay. Last one here. It is, by the way, really crazy that there are a lot of these games. You know, you and I can talk for a while and want to make sure we hit on everything, but there really are a lot of games where there just is not a lot. Like on other weeks, you know, we may have spent 5 seconds on Jacksonville, Tennessee, but because so many games feel the same way, you got to get a little bit into the weeds. And I think that's kind of where I'm at on Dallas and New England as well. I expect this game to stay close, and I think that right now, Ezekiel Elliott getting the same ownership as Barkley, right around 8.5%, is just a better play. If you're going to produce against New England, you beat them on the ground. I think you're going to have a tough time with Dak Prescott trying to force the ball to Gallup and Amari Cooper, particularly Amari. Will he look towards Witten? Sure, it's possible, but you don't win games that way. And as I mentioned earlier, Saquon Barkley in a matchup against the team that does not give up big plays and will also likely be playing from behind or at least not with the lead. And he hasn't looked the same since the ankle injury. At the same ownership and at price points that are separated by $400 on DraftKings, where Barkley's actually $400 more, Elliott to me stands out as a good play this week. I know he hasn't been great, but he's going to get all the opportunities at the goal line in the red zone in the backfield. And 75 to me is a fair price.
Yeah, 75 is a fair price. That's like the only spot on this Dallas team that I'm probably going to go to.
Yeah, I have nothing else.
Yeah, nothing else here. So Elliott's in a fine spot. We think that this, as long as the game stays close, and they're 6-point underdogs, so it can get a little wonky. He will see some pass catching work too, so Elliott's okay there. 23.1 opportunities per game, 29th ranked Patriots run defense, according to Pro Football Focus. So it's bad because he's an underdog on the road, so he's not a priority. But I do think the price point is fair on Elliott around guys like Saquon. So he's the only thing that stands out because even Randall Cobb in the slot is a secondary option. Whether he gets Jonathan Jones, who's been good, or J.C. Jackson, who's only given up 20 yards a game in the slot, that's not great. Michael Gallup on the outside against McCourty, 2 receptions per game allowed for 24.6 yards. That's not great. And then you have Stephon Gilmore, who continues to be fascinating against a banged-up Amari Cooper, a knee, and a bum ankle. In 6, so far this season, any cornerback who's played 250 coverage snaps, which is about 6 or 7 games, he's only behind Richard Sherman in passer rating. Gilmore, once again, has been absolutely dynamite this year. 2.8 receptions per game for 34.7 yards. Nothing on Dallas stands out. If anything, it's Zeke. I don't even think he's a priority just because of the 6-point road underdog, but he's at least in play.
Okay. New England. Julian Edelman is just force-fed the football every single week, and he's got 10-plus targets now in 5 straight games. There's that's always reason for me to say, hey, sub 7K Julian Edelman, I'm on board, no problem there. But outside of that, no interest in Sony Michel. James White, as we've mentioned many times, do you really want to pay that price for him when his upside is pretty limited? I'd honestly rather go with Phillip Lindsay for sure. And if Howard's out, it sounds wild, but I'd rather go with Sanders because I think Sanders can at least give you, on a good game, if he gets off to a nice start, 15 attempts and also 6 or so 7 targets in the passing game. But I just prefer Lindsay a lot more here. Outside of Edelman, I'm pretty down on this Pats team, and Tom Brady has not looked, like vintage Tom Brady or even close.
Yeah, he hasn't looked like vintage Tom Brady at all. I'm a little bit maybe not concerned, but I want to at least unpack what this Patriots wide receiver core can look like. Sanu, they said, is expected to miss a few weeks now. So he was a guy who would have had a bad matchup against Byron Jones, but now expected to miss a few weeks. You have him iced out, so take him out of the equation. Philip Dorsett has not been practicing, so unless did he practice on a limited basis? Philip Dorsett.
Yeah, he was there, but he was a non-participant yesterday.
Yeah, I believe he's still in the concussion protocol. So we'll see what happens with Dorsett. But let's just imagine even Dorsett suits up. You'll have Edelman, Dorsett, and you'll have N'Keal Harry being the starting receivers, I'd imagine, because Jacoby Myers has been more so in the slot behind Edelman. So that doesn't really – nothing stands out there. Once again, like you said, Edelman would be okay. But say Philip Dorsett misses this game, your starting receivers are probably going to be N'Keal Harry on the outside. He'll get Byron Jones for a rookie. That's a terrible matchup. You'll probably get Jacoby Myers in the slot and push Julian Edelman out wide because Jacoby Myers has primarily been working out of the slot this season when he plays, which makes it worse for Edelman. So I think the best case scenario is that Philip Dorsett plays and Edelman has a nice role in the slot. Although Jordan Lewis in the slot for the Cowboys, 53.5 pass rating against this season since taking over that job about a month ago. I think either way, it's a tough matchup for Edelman, but if he gets pushed to the outside here, he'll get a nicer matchup against Awuzie on the outside. It's much worse for a slot receiver to play on the outside in Edelman. So yeah, it's a long way of saying I agree with what you're saying in terms of Edelman being the one who stands out. It's just interesting because they could be running a wide receiver core of N'Keal Harry, Jacoby Myers, and Julian Edelman, and that's just gross to deal with.
Yo, no question. Jordan Lewis, when you mentioned 53.5, if you take anyone with at least 100 coverage snaps in the slot, Kwan Williams and Jason McCourty have been the only 2 slot corners better than Jordan Lewis this year. So there's that. He's also been targeted only 15 times in the slot. That's the 3rd most. So I don't like this matchup at all. I mean, yeah, not only has he been good, but they're not targeting him. Now, it's always important to go back and look at matchups. I know you do the same. Have they faced a bunch of garbage slot receivers? Very possible. But at the same time, he has been good. I just think when it comes to Edelman, it doesn't really matter as much, especially with Mohamed Sanu out. You're going to have to get Julian Edelman the ball. So I guess the one question I have for you, though, is with Sanu out, do we now have to upgrade James White?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I think it does give an upgrade to James White here because I think this stands out if you're ever to have your 8 to 10 plus reception day for James White and maybe even Ben Watson as an upgraded tight end. In GPPs, this would have to be the spot. You're really not going to get much out of N'Keal Harry if he's going to have to line up against Byron Jones, and you're not going to get much out of Jacoby Myers against Jordan Lewis. So, yeah, it's Edelman on the outside if Dorsett misses, which it seems like it's leaning that way, and then it's just James White and Ben Watson. So, yeah, I have in bold just written down in notes that this is probably the best matchup and the best spot on the week just due to injuries and the way that the defense matches up for James White and Ben Watson for GPP options.
Okay. Well, that'll do it for us, Sal. 11 up, 11 down. Another good show here on the NFL Strategy Show. Appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And be sure to stick around on the channel for the rest of the day. We've got a whole lot coming up. So if you're around, stay here. You've got Live Before Lock coming up. Alex, Awesemo himself, Alex Baker, and our boy Ben Rasa. They're coming up directly after us. Showdown Live Before Lock. Then the Strategy Show. Jake Hari, Nolan Kelly got you with the NHL picks for 4 p.m. Then the Deeper Dive with myself and Adam Scher, 6 p.m. And then 7 p.m. Live Before Lock with Fast Eddie Fear and Chris Spag. So that's our lineup for the rest of the day. Hopefully you'll hang out with us up until lock. And we'll see you back here next time on the NFL Strategy Show presented by Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. Hit that thumbs up before you head out. Greatly appreciated, and it helps us a ton. Peace.